This is the December 20th, 1963 issue of Muhammad Speaks, published every 2 weeks in Chicago. On page 3, this item appeared. It's a report that Elijah Muhammad, from his home in Phoenix, telephoned the newspaper ordering that a statement be placed on page 1. The report goes on to say that the paper had already gone to press and that the statement could not be published until 2 weeks later in the next edition. The statement reads, "We with the world are very shocked at the assassination of our president." Meanwhile, a widely publicized statement about the assassination had been made by Malcolm X, then chief public spokesman for the Muslims. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad responded by suspending Malcolm and publishing this statement. When Minister Malcolm addressed the public and mentioned the president's death, he did not speak for Muslims. He was speaking for himself and not for Muslims in general. He has been suspended from public speaking for the time being. The nation still mourns the loss of our president. Malcolm's statement was that the assassination was a case of the chickens coming home to roost. Malcolm has since left the Muslim organization and has established his own organization in Harlem.
Malcolm actually was discovered long before he was suspended. I only suspended for a time. I only tried him because I knew that he was not going to accept it. And I said, just keep quiet for 90 days. And he would not do it. And I knew he would not do it because he felt that he would be losing his prestige.
Malcolm has claimed that many of your followers have left and chosen to follow him and his organization.
That's no truth at all. Malcolm has left his own organization and teachings. In fact about it, we don't see where that we have missed any of our followers by Malcolm's deviation. He, in fact about it, has increased our followers. We have more followers today than we had when Malcolm was with us, and we have more unity than we had when Malcolm was with us.
I think dissension took place within the Muslim movement, and I think Malcolm was being forced out. Malcolm had become their most articulate spokesman. After all, the Muslims have been around since 1930. Nobody heard about them until, of course, Malcolm X got out of jail. And then, of course, the Muslims broke. So the Muslims and Malcolm X became one and the same thing.
At the deviation of Malcolm, I'm not surprised, but they cannot yet say that I am not the messenger of Allah. They can't take that away from me.
At a press conference, I had occasion to talk with Congressman Adam Clayton Powell about the Muslims.
I don't agree with him. Never have. But I don't consider him to be dangerous. In my district, for instance, in Harlem, we haven't got more than 1,000 Muslims.
Well, then the comparative strength in Harlem is very little.
Oh, very little. Very little. And there they had their most brilliant and most fluent leader, Malcolm X.
Well, now, since Malcolm split with Elijah Muhammad, what is his acceptance in Harlem? How do people feel about Malcolm?
They're waiting for him to come back.
For what reason?
Well, a lot of people want to talk to him. They want to know why, after all these years of proclaiming one philosophy, he has suddenly shifted now into a different philosophy. And a lot of his young men, the Fruit of Islam group, they have become disillusioned with him and with the other movement, the black Muslim movement, because they only went into the black Muslim movement, many of them, because of Malcolm X. And things are rather chaotic.
It is my own prediction that now that Malcolm is out of the movement, that they will return soon to the oblivion from which they came. I attended a Muslim rally in New York City at the Audubon Ballroom. And they had about some 5,000 Negroes jam-packed into this place. And Elijah, of course, was to speak. But before Elijah spoke, they brought on his son, Akbar Muhammad, who is, of course, studying at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. And Akbar walked onto the stage of the Audubon in the formal dress of an upper-class Muslim. with a white turban around his head. And an old Negro woman from Mississippi sitting behind me said, "My God, he looks just like the Ku Klux Klan to me." The point is, no white man, or black man for that matter, draped in a white sheet will ever sell the American Negro anything.
The real power of the Muslims does not lie in their numerical strength, but in the fact that they are able to tap a number of deep and powerful currents, which are a consequence of the Negro's experience of segregation in America. One, the Muslims exploit the idea of separation, which to some Negroes seems to be the only way out. And two, the Muslims are not only able to give voice to the anger and hatred felt by some Negroes, they promise retribution against the white man as well.
The white man is by nature not the black man, and the black man by nature is not the white man. And you can't make no brotherhood there.
There's nothing really new about the black Muslims. The only new thing is that at long last the American Negro has produced somebody, let's face it, a theological gestalt, which allows them to say the same things about white people which white people have been saying about Negroes and non-white people all of their lives.
Somebody where? Someone sick? Dr. Alim and a nurse, would you please go and look after the person that is sick? Thank you. Thank you very much. We have some nurses that are going right there right now. It's all right. We'll take care of it. Everybody you remember how that was. Take your hand out of my pocket. So we'll let whoever's out there take care of that. We got to be mindful of history lest we have to repeat it.
Most leaders of the Nation of Islam were filled with blind hatred for what they perceived as Malcolm's portrayal of sexual corruption by Elijah Muhammad, his mentor. Their responses created a climate that made the murder of Malcolm X a fait accompli. One of Malcolm's dissenters was Louis X, a relatively unknown at the time, who would later become Minister Louis Farrakhan and the leader of the group. In a 1985 interview, I asked him about his role in Malcolm's death. Do you feel that your criticisms of Malcolm during that period contributed to his assassination?
I feel that the climate created by Malcolm's revelation of the domestic life of Elijah Muhammad to the press, feeding them information that they could use in a negative way against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it created an equal and opposite reaction among the followers of Elijah Muhammad. I, being one of those zealous followers, jumped to the defense of Elijah Muhammad and to the attack of Malcolm. And so in that context, I believe my words and others' words were like fuel on a fire.
Did you apologize to Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz?
I sat with Betty Shabazz last year in February. I was speaking in upstate New York. I think it was Albany. And Betty came and sat on the stage with me. I sat with Betty afterwards, and she told me what she had on her mind. I could not speak back to Betty. She was very angry, as naturally she would be. This is the first time she had confronted one of those whom she would look at as a contributor to the condition that led to her husband's assassination. And naturally, in that first meeting, she was exceedingly angry with me, and a brother was looking over my shoulder, and she was blessing me out, if you will. And I took every word that she said, because I feel that it is only when Betty can express herself to those of us whom she feels were involved and who may have been involved, that the healing can begin.
On December 1st, 1963, at a public rally in New York City, when asked what he thought of President Kennedy's assassination, Malcolm called it a case of, quote, the chickens coming home to roost, which was construed generally as meaning he was happy Kennedy was dead. 2 days later, the press reported a 90-day suspension of Malcolm X by Elijah Muhammad for the comment.
How severe were the restrictions these past 90 days?
Oh, during the past 90 days, they were most severe. I've been completely silent.
Not able to talk is a real affliction for you, is that right?
Not only have I not been able to speak as a Muslim, I haven't even been able to speak as a man.
Actually, going back to that incident, you have told me on other occasions that you didn't actually say you were glad the president was dead. What did you say, Malcolm?
No, my subject that day was God's judgment of white America. And I showed the different incidents that had been building up, step by step, the fulfillment of prophecy, and that all of these things that were taking place were the result of some seeds that were badly sown, or some bad seeds that were sown. And the death of the president I referred to as the result of other things, a combination of things. And surprisingly, this is what the whole country was saying, that it was a climate of hate. So chickens coming home to roost means the same thing.
And this is what you said, chickens were coming home to roost.
Yes.
But in no time did you say you were glad the president was dead.
No, I did say this, that it pleases me to see that the wisdom of the prophets, these ancient prophets, was so vast that they could foresee these things exactly as they were to come to pass thousands of years ago. This was part of my lecture that day, and they twisted it.
In mid-December 1963, the suspension of Malcolm X was extended indefinitely. On March 12, 1964, after 10 years with the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X called a press conference announcing his break with Mr. Muhammad and the formation of a new group fostering black nationalism.
Well, I have been able to see for some time that that I do run into obstacles in trying to help him within the movement. So I want to help him just that bad, just that much. So it's my intention to try and do it now in the only way that I know how. And I think I can do it better without the restrictions that I would run into by being a part of the Muslim movement in this country. That is, the Muslim movement as it now exists.
After his break with the Muslims, Malcolm broadened his scope to include the international scene. And it was at this point that his life was threatened. In April 1964, Malcolm made a pilgrimage to Mecca. Here, at 39 years old, he received the name El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, the honorary Hajj being given to all who visit that Muslim holy city. From Mecca, he journeyed to Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, and Algeria, finally returning to the United States May 21, 1964. Malcolm wanted to galvanize public opinion against the United States for its oppression of black Americans, and to get African support in bringing the American racial question before the United Nations. To do this, he needed the support of independent African states. And so in the summer of 1964, Malcolm returned to Africa for a 4-month tour to 14 countries. In his autobiography, Malcolm notes that he was followed throughout Africa by persons from an unknown source. One of them was described as, quote, a thin-lipped, olive-skinned man.
And what sort of reaction have you been getting from the African leaders?
Well, I've gotten a good reaction, a very sympathetic reaction, and an understanding reaction. Many of them had been misinformed by the American government into thinking that black people in America don't identify with Africa, and therefore they've restrained themselves from voicing their interest in our problem. But I've impressed upon them that our problem is their problem, as well as their problems are our problems.
On July 23, 1964, Malcolm was in Cairo, Egypt, to deliver a scathing attack of Washington's domestic and foreign policies. Shortly after that address, before the African Summit Conference, he collapsed in his hotel room with severe abdominal pains. According to Eric Norden in an article, The Murder of Malcolm X, Malcolm was rushed to a Cairo hospital suffering from toxic poisoning and had to have his stomach pumped. Malcolm later said he had been deliberately poisoned. Throughout the fall of 1964, Malcolm worked primarily on his plan to indict America in the United Nations. According to Eric Norden's information, Malcolm had been under surveillance since he broke with the Muslims, but now there were as many as, quote, 3 different agents shadowing him at one time.
And what do you hope for from this conference? Well, we hope to bring pressure upon them, or rather we hope to impress upon them the importance of their bringing pressure and world opinion upon the United States to take some meaningful effort to solve our problem in America. We want them to help us get our problem before the United Nations and charge America with violating our human rights in the same way that South Africa is charged with violating the human rights of our people in that area.
In early February of 1965, Malcolm flew to London to address the Council of African Organizations. From there, he was scheduled to fly to Paris to deliver another speech. However, on February the 9th, when his plane landed in France, he was told by agents of the French government not to deplane, and he was ordered to leave the country immediately. Later, Malcolm was to say, according to Eric Norden, after an interview with Malcolm's sister, that his being barred from France led him to believe that the plotters of his death were much bigger than the Muslims. On Saturday, February the 12th, Malcolm returned to the United States by way of London. 10 hours later, at 2:45 Sunday morning, the home in which Malcolm, his wife Betty Shabazz, and their 4 children lived was firebombed. The house was severely damaged, although Malcolm and his family amazingly escaped unharmed. On February 20th, he called a business meeting of his new group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. That night, Malcolm stayed alone in a 12th floor room at the New York Hilton Hotel on 53rd Street and 6th Avenue. His family had been put up by friends in Queens, New York. A man later identified as Thomas Hagen, one of Malcolm's assassins, would be identified by a Hilton Hotel house detective as one of 3 black men asking questions about the location of Malcolm's room. Malcolm told Alex Haley on February the 20th, 1965, the day before he was murdered, and I quote, "The more I keep thinking about this thing, the things that have been happening lately, I'm not at all sure it's the Muslims. I know what they can do and what they can't. And they can't do some of the stuff recently going on." The next morning, February 21st, the day of his murder, Malcolm left his 12th floor hotel room, got into his blue Oldsmobile, and finally parked his car a number of blocks from the Audubon Ballroom, where his organization's meeting was to take place. He entered the main ballroom about 2:30 p.m. Shortly after 3 p.m., approximately 400 people had crowded into the ballroom, sitting on folding wooden chairs. One of Malcolm's aides introduced him. The New York Herald Tribune on February the 22nd, 1965, reconstructed what happened from eyewitness accounts. The applause stopped, and the people sat down, and Malcolm's goatee face looked up and he said, "Assalamu alaikum," and the crowd murmured its response of, "Peace be with you also, walaikum salam." And then the 2 leadoff men made their move. They were in a middle row, and they stood up and started pushing each other. And one of them was saying, "Get your hands out of my pocket. Stop messing with my pocket." Malcolm's bodyguards started to move towards them to break it up. And up on the stage, Malcolm stepped out from behind the lectern, and he was saying, "Now, brothers, break it up. Let's cool it." He stood there, alone on the stage, with one hand up in the air, and he was a perfect target. And a man, police say he was Thomas Hagen, ran down the aisle with a shotgun, and the ones with him were already shooting. When the shotgun was right in front of Malcolm X, both barrels raped him. Several questions arise from press accounts of what happened that day. In all 3 New York morning papers, descriptions were given of the capture of 2 suspects at the Audubon immediately after the murder. In later editions of the same papers and from then on, only one suspect was said to have been captured at the scene by the police, and the press never questioned this. An early edition of the New York Times, dated February 22nd, 1965, in an article headlined, "Malcolm X shot to death at rally here," said, quote, "The police indicated 2 suspects were being questioned," end of quote. One of those suspects was identified as Thomas Hagen. In a later paragraph, the capture of the second suspect was described. The New York Times said Patrolman Thomas Hoy, 22, said he had been stationed outside the 166th Street entrance when, quote, "I heard the shooting and the place exploded." According to the New York Times, he rushed in, saw Malcolm lying on the stage and, quote, grabbed the suspect, who he said some people were chasing. "As I brought him to the front of the ballroom, the crowd began beating me and the suspect," Patrolman Hoy explained. He said he put this man, not otherwise identified later for news persons, into a police car to be taken to the Wadsworth Avenue station. A late city edition of the same paper only indicated one person, Thomas Hagen, was captured at the scene. There is no further mention of a second suspect from then on. All early edition February 22nd newspapers were actually on the newsstands the night of February 21st, which is the date of the assassination. In the February 22nd early edition of the New York Daily News, the same thing happened. Quote, "2 men and the reputed assassin were taken by police from the hands of a howling mob of Malcolm's followers. Both men were spirited away by the police." Again, later editions made no further mention of a second man. Because of the mystery surrounding the second suspect, several independent writers in lesser-known publications wondered if he could have been a police agent, and several other questions followed. What was the other man arrested by Patrolman Hoy doing to make the crowd think him a suspect? The police never explained why they didn't release this suspect's name, as they did with Thomas Hagen's. He was described by eyewitnesses at the Audubon Ballroom as a, quote, "tight-lipped, olive-skinned man with slanted eyes," end quote. The same description was used by Malcolm for a man he said followed him throughout Africa and Europe. One of the most curious aspects of the events surrounding Malcolm's assassination has to do with Gene Roberts, an undercover policeman who infiltrated Malcolm's organization. Shown here administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to Malcolm as he lay on the Audubon stage. The Muslims claim Roberts had defected from them to go with Malcolm the year before. He finally surfaced as an undercover police agent at the New York trial of the Panther 13. According to the New York Times of December 8, 1970, Roberts was assigned to undercover work when he became a policeman in 1965, the year that Malcolm was killed, and did not reveal himself until his Panther 13 grand jury testimony on April the 1st, 1969. The Times says, quote, "Detective Gene Roberts said he had been assigned to infiltrate the organization of Malcolm X and was on duty as the black leader's bodyguard the afternoon he was killed on the stage." Besides Thomas Hagen, the one suspect police admitted holding, 2 others were later arrested. Norman Butler on February 26th and Thomas Johnson on March 3rd, 1965. Neither was arrested at the scene. During the last days of the trial, the other suspect, Thomas Hagen, confessed to murdering Malcolm X, but said it was others, not Butler and Johnson, who aided him in the assassination. All 3 were subsequently found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Here is a reenactment of the court transcript.
Thomas Hagen.
I know that they, Butler and Johnson, didn't have anything to do with the crime that was committed at the Audubon Ballroom February 21st, that I did take part in it, and that I know for a fact that they weren't there, and that I wanted to tell this to the jury, this to be known to the jury, the court, and the judge. I want to tell the truth.
Assistant District Attorney Dermody.
Will you tell us what the plan was, how the assassination was to take place?
Hagen.
4 people, 2 people sitting in the front row, man with the shotgun, short, dark man with the beard sitting around the 4th row from the front, man in the back. One man starts commotion, says, "Get your hand out of my pocket." Guards from the stage goes after this man. Man with the shotgun shoots Malcolm. 2 men on the front row.
shoot pistols.
DA.
And which of these men were you?
Hagen.
One of the men sitting on the front row.
Later in the court transcript, DA.
Do you know the names of these 4 people?
Hagen.
I do.
DA.
Give us the names of these 4 people that you say you know were involved with you.
Hagen.
I will not.
DA.
You testified a few moments ago that you were told to do this by somebody. Is that right?
Hagen.
I was offered some money for doing it from people that probably would have been revealed if Mr. Williams
One of the defense attorneys.
could have continued his interrogation.
DA.
I ask that that be stricken as not responsive.
The judge.
Strike it out. Although Hagen testified that 3 others were involved, only 2 others were convicted, neither of whom was involved in the murder, according to Hagen. According to the court transcript, no further efforts were made in the trial by defense attorneys or the prosecution to discover the identity or the person or persons who hired Hagen and his confederates.
A minute. Those drills the FOI did in the streets, it was all about posing, posturing. We never put any real boots on the ground in 1965. We didn't knock some heads. This was only about looking tough. No wonder Malcolm wanted some action. This ain't what he signed up for. All nations of the world have a fighting army. The FOI didn't take on anyone oppressing black people. No wonder why we aren't respected worldwide. The FOI of 1965 failed us big time. I had their chance to establish a rep for black men. We could have been known worldwide as men not to mess with. But what did we do? We squandered it all and blew the opportunity. All we were known for was beating up on our own people. And now it was time to assemble and go after Brother Malcolm. The FOI was capable. They were equipped. But all they went after was another brother. Where were the FOI when racist Klansmen were openly walking down the streets of America, chanting and taunting people, challenging people to step to them? The FOI had the muscle. The FOI put on public displays showing their numbers. Their bodies were stiff. They marched in cadence. They looked angry. They had scowls on their faces. If looks could kill, where were they? I know where they were in 1965. They were going after Malcolm. You mean to tell me I'm supposed to brag to my grandchildren that I was in the FOI? And when they ask me, did I see any action, I'm supposed to change the subject? I won't be able to tell them any war stories about how the FOI took on the Klan, how we rumbled with the skinheads, locked horns with the FBI. All we did was walk around? Get the fuck out of here.
There's brothers and sisters. Here's the Saturday Evening Post, dated February the 27th, 1965. And in it, there's an article titled, "An Ex-Official Tells Why the Black Muslims Are a Fraud." This is one of the brothers in Boston who was formerly the secretary up there, and who is the cousin of Ronald Stokes, the brother who was killed out in California in April of 1962.
That edition of the Saturday Evening Post magazine, dated February 27, 1965, that sold for 25 cents, was explosive. The article titled "An Ex-Official Tells Why the Black Muslims Are a Fraud" by Aubrey Barnett and Edward Lynn was 7 pages long. It spoke of the much-feared Nation of Islam's inside violence, extortion tactics, its fakery and money-grabbing schemes that fed on the members' frustrations. It covered how brothers and sisters lost their businesses to the movement, how they were forced to sell Muhammad Speaks newspapers and other obligations of the organization. Central to the magazine's article was an ex-Nation of Islam official named Aubrey Barnett, who was beaten severely right in front of Mosque number 11 of Boston by Clarence X. Gill and other FOI members under the watch of Louis X. The cult's strict enforcement law for all male members to sell newspapers wasn't for the promotion of the cult's ideology. It was because they needed a front to show where their money was coming from. The real windfall was from a rich white man named H.L. Hunt. The write-up about the cult's practices will send chills down your spine. Beantown wasn't the only city the Fruit of Islam got down and dirty in. The rep of two New York Muslims' mere names when mentioned caused people to lose sleep and get a lump in their throats. New York's Mosque number 7's enforcers, Thomas 15X Johnson and Norman 3X Butler, beat the living daylights out of so many black people you wouldn't know where to start. These two guys, along with three other enforcers named William Gaines, Elliot Walk, and Willie 8X, shot another former Nation of Islam member named Benjamin Brown simply for starting his own mosque and hanging up a picture of Elijah Muhammad on his mosque wall. On February 21, 1965, the day Malcolm X was murdered, someone who resembled Norman 3X Butler can be seen rubbernecking for a glimpse of Malcolm being taken out of the Audubon ballroom. This person, though his back is turned from the camera, is wearing a hat tilted back on his head the way Butler always wore his hat. This person is also wearing a tweed coat, the type of coat Butler often wore. It's said that Norman Butler wasn't in or near the Audubon ballroom the day Malcolm X was slain. An important question to raise in the reopening of the Malcolm X case is to ask Butler, did he ever attend any of the functions inside the Audubon ballroom prior to Malcolm X's assassination? And if he was asked to participate by his superiors, how did he turn the offer down without being reprimanded or stripped of his rank? We're only asking the same thing Red Fox is asking.
Norman, is that you?
For a much more detailed forensic study on this controversy, please see the Black Zapruder trilogy film put out by filmmakers Omar Shabazz and author-scholar Carl Evans. After the murder, Linwood X immediately calls Newark, New Jersey's Mosque number 25 and Mosque number 7 and informs that the man called Malcolm X will trouble them no more. We shut that red nigger down. You're gonna have to wait to see it on film for yourself. We know for certain the leadership of the Nation of Islam planned Malcolm's murder. And we know for certain the names of many participants. What about the New York City Police Department? Where did they suddenly appear from after the shooting? Were they present to protect Malcolm or to protect the killers? Why was William Bradley so casual and not quick to run to the getaway car? Why don't we have photographs of all of Malcolm's named assassins? Why was Malcolm allowed to speak while being in such a worn-out, overworked state that he was in? Why didn't Malcolm's followers notice that the Nation of Islam were holding affairs right inside the Audubon Ballroom? Who had Malcolm's back? The Nation of Islam of 1965 had a good thing going, and they blew it. When Elijah Muhammad started showing signs that he was aging fast and getting sick, that's when members in high positions panicked and realized that Malcolm could take Elijah's place. If Malcolm took over, he would have changed the whole program. The first thing he would have done was have the men in the organization purchase rifles and shotguns for some serious self-defense, just like all nations do. Waiting on some mysterious unseen force to protect black people was ridiculous to a realist like Malcolm. And now, the Nation of Islam members wanted Malcolm to go by any means necessary. In fact, Malcolm said that the fruit of Islam were foaming at the mouth to get him. The story about Elijah Muhammad instructing his followers to leave Malcolm alone is ridiculous.
Sir, yes, I do believe there'll be further attempts on my life. I know them. They're foaming at the mouth. The rank and file Muslim means well. It's those at the hierarchy who are living off the fatted calf who don't mean well. And this coming Sunday at 2 o'clock, as I say, our program will be unfolded. Elijah Muhammad knows, and he has done some good things, and he has done some bad things. He knows that if he had wanted to, he could have united our people with the Muslim world just by teaching the right religion of Islam. He could have done so. The entire Muslim world would have accepted him. As it is now, the Muslim world has rejected him. He can never go into the Muslim world saying that he's a prophet or that Allah came over here in the flesh. They would cut his head off if he said that over there. I mean, he knows this. None of his followers can go over there without denouncing him. It's impossible for them to go to Mecca or any other place unless they ascribe to Islam as it is ascribed to over there. So he was in a position to unite us with the Muslim world, those of us who are Muslims. He was also in a position to unite us with Africa. But you cannot read anything that Elijah Muhammad has ever written that's pro-African. I defy you to find one word in his direct writing that's pro-African. You can't find it.
After the anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination, I went to the scene of the tragedy, the Audubon Ballroom in Upper Manhattan. Although 20 years had gone by, a strange pall hung over the all but abandoned hall. With the help of workmen, we repositioned the chairs where the audience sat and cleared the stage from which Malcolm stood before being gunned down. The workmen miraculously dug up the actual lectern behind which Malcolm stood that day. The bullet holes were still visible. I was able to convince writer Peter Bailey, photographer Robert Higgins, and electronics specialist Earl Grant to come to the ballroom. They were followers of Malcolm X. They had been there the day Malcolm was murdered, but they hadn't been back since.
Today is the first time that I have stepped foot in the Audubon Ballroom since that day. I never thought I would ever come in here again at all. I had no reason, to come in. I had people that invited me to social affairs here, but these were mainly people who didn't know me. So they were having events here, and invited me to come in, but I never, this is the first time since then. And it's still, it's very visual.
How do you feel?
I can still visualize it, still very visual to me. I feel a little shaky because the place really has, bad memories as far as I'm concerned. But I can actually hear and visualize what I saw that day and what was going, the people laying all over the floors and people screaming and crying and, Brother Malcolm laying on the stage and rolling his body on the stretcher. And I look out and I see, Columbia Presbyterian, and I will always despise those people because they did not send doctors over here.
Did you see any police here in uniform?
I think some were in the office in the back, all the way in the back there. I think there were several back there, and there were a lot downstairs outside of the building. They were lined up like they were in a parade formation outside.
The police arrested another man, and that man has never been examined. He's never come to trial. We don't even know his name. We don't know what happened. And as far as I'm concerned, it seemed awfully strange to me that within seconds after Malcolm was shot, the place was flooded with police. Later investigation revealed the fact that there were several undercover officers in the room, FBI and everything else. They were all armed. They didn't lift one finger to help Malcolm, to assist him. They allowed these people, these murderers, to come in and shoot Malcolm down and escape. And it seemed awfully strange to me that they could come in, execute a man like Malcolm in broad daylight, and get away.
Hare was shot. He was the one, he get shot. And I think that that's the reason that he got caught. I think if Hare had not been caught, there never would have been a trial. There would have just been, well, we're still looking, we're trying to find out what went on, you know. I think that that was the part of the plan that failed, was the fact that Hare did get, got shot. And as a result, they had to have a trial because they had somebody that, that people actually had tied to the whole thing.
I saw Hager coming down the stairs, and the crowd was beating him. They kicked him, knocked him down, and then the police officers took him away from the crowd.
He looked like a zombie, like he was in some sort of deep hypnotic trance. Because they were beating him and kicking him. They were kicking him all in the face, and he never uttered a word, never let a sound out. Like he was numb, couldn't feel anything. He was just staring, kind of buck-eyed and staring. Like maybe he was doped up on something, I don't know.
I would like to see the case reopened because I don't believe, for a moment that the real story of who was behind the assassination. I'm not talking about who pulled the trigger. I'm talking about who was behind the assassination of Brother Malcolm. It's not out. I think I was saying recently that I had read a book called Ike's Spies, in which this guy just says flatly that the United States, he tells in detail the United States and government involvement in the assassination of Lumumba. And for years they denied any involvement in that. But they feel secure enough now that they're prepared to say some 20 years later, that they did do this. I think with the situation with Brother Malcolm, it probably will happen a little bit later, but eventually some white journalist will get will be given that information, maybe another 15 or 20 years, and he'll write a book just similar to Ike's Spies, which will tell you exactly who was behind the assassination. I think that the assassination of Brother Malcolm was not done by people who were guided, at least I don't believe, now maybe I'm wrong, who were guided by ideological passion. I think these were professional killers.
There's always somebody up top that orders this and then cleans their hands of it, like getting these dummies arrested and salted away for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just low-level flunkies, that's all.
You think so, too? Of course. Because we know that no assassination takes place in a vacuum. There are always conspirators, and the Elder King, Martin Luther King, and the others, same thing. There's always someone hidden, and an investigation might bring that person out in the open.
And so clearly the questions prevail. And if there is a possible answer, it might come out of an energetic, vigorous investigation, which could be ordered by the Manhattan District Attorney. But so far, efforts in this direction have failed.
I thought the court had a responsibility to order the district attorney to at least investigate these four men whose names and descriptions we had given. He refused to do that. He said the courts have no authority to do that. Well, if they have no authority, then at least the district attorney has an obligation, when he gets information like this, to at least send an investigator over and talk to these men. One of them was in jail and very easily available, and the others were all in New Jersey and apparently available. Now I think one has died, so the passage of time is sort of wrecking the chances to get to the truth of the assassination of Malcolm X.
They came up with what they call a civil rights bill in 1964, supposedly to solve our problem, and after the bill was signed, 3 civil rights workers were murdered in cold blood. And the FBI head, Hoover, admits that they know who did it. They've known ever since it happened, and they've done nothing about it. Civil rights bill down the drain. No matter how many bills pass, black people in that country, where I'm from, still our lives are not worth 2 cents. And the government has shown its inability, or either its unwillingness, to do whatever is necessary to protect life and property where the black American is concerned. Our desire, our prayer, that we can have a peaceful, intelligent rally here this afternoon.